Hey folks, it's Mike Savage here, back for a conversation. We've had a couple of conversations during the campaign podcast, and I'm really pleased to talk today a little bit about Halifax in the context of the national political scene. And I'm joined by two people I've had the pleasure to work with and have come to admire very much. My old pal Billy Karsten from District 3. And for the last year, he has been the president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and has played an active role nationally for a number of years. Billy, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Certainly my pleasure to be here. And, the year and 4 months that I've served as president of Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM, has been a real thrill and a real eye-opener in terms of what it means in Canada to have really, really strong mayors. And I'll allude to that again in a few minutes. Thanks for the invite to be here.
It's awesome to have you. And another guy that I've had the real privilege of getting to know and work with since he became the mayor of Edmonton, I think in 2013, a year after I became mayor in Halifax, and that's Don Iveson, who has for the last number of years been the chair of the Big City Mayors Caucus in Canada. Don, thank you for taking some time to join us. How are things in Edmonton today?
It's a beautiful day here in Alberta's capital city, and it's always a pleasure to connect with you, Lord Mayor Mike, and with President Bill, who's been just phenomenal to work with on the national scene through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. But you're two of my favorite Canadian leaders, and so this will be fun to talk. Thanks.
Yeah, I really appreciated it. And, when I became the mayor, I must say, in Halifax in 2012, I went to my first mayor's meeting before you were elected, and at the time, a bunch of the mayors in Canada were in trouble. Half of them seemed to be on their way into legal trouble. Other mayors didn't attend the big city mayors. And the next year, it was really Mayor Nenshi and I and Watson were the three who were there. And then you joined the next year, and other mayors came along that really made a big difference. So I wonder if I can just, first of all, let's just update each other. So, Don, talk just a little bit, if you would, about COVID this year in particular and the demands it's made on you and all the cities in Canada.
Well, like every mayor in any community in this country, urban or rural, large or small, northern or southern, English or French, we were united really rapidly by a lot of the same public health challenges, a lot of the same governance challenges, and a lot of the innovation requirements to move things online. Our own organizations and our own workplaces needed to adapt. And then we needed to support communities and small businesses and vulnerable people. And that showed up in the same way from coast to coast to coast. But acutely in the big cities, I think some of the pressures were most extreme. The impacts, the fiscal impacts in terms of supporting vulnerable people, and the fiscal impacts in terms of the lost ridership and lost revenue on public transit systems disrupted us in a disproportionate way. And the biggest cities had the most issues. And so it was critical for us to get together, and we were on weekly calls early on. So in addition to my responsibilities here in Edmonton, I found a lot of extra work to do convening the big city mayors, but I also found tremendous solidarity and support and peer support, really, and resiliency through it in very quickly realizing we're dealing with largely the same challenges, and that even our, the mid-sized cities and the rural leaders were dealing with a lot of the same issues too. And again, the value of being part of these larger networks and being in regular contact and sharing information, and then eventually aligning what our asks were going to be for help from the rest of the country and the federal government and the provinces. It was very heartening, but certainly from a leadership perspective, it's been the most challenging work I've ever had to do. And I think if I felt alone in it, it would have been pretty tough to get through. It's been tough, but again, having colleagues like yourselves and the other folks around the big city mayor's table and the excellent staff at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities who've done extraordinary work to support us on the technical side, and our administrations and frontline workers here too. I'm buoyed by all of that, but particularly the collegiality of the mayors, including yourself, who always add levity to our meetings with your you may not be the biggest city, but you have the largest personality around our table, Mike, clearly. So it's always.
I think that's a good thing, Mike.
You take what you can get. But, I remember those early calls, Don, after COVID, and, this is March, April, early on, and there was a lot of unanswered questions. We didn't exactly know ourselves, and to some extent still don't know the full challenge of what COVID means to municipal budgets down the road, how it's going to affect commercial rates, and how it's going to continue to affect direct revenue. Billy, you're the president of FCM, and FCM is an extraordinary political force in this country. I knew it before I became mayor, but I think it's been accelerated. And our ability to bring people like the Deputy Prime Minister onto calls on short notice, and Don's influence in getting some of the key people on the phone as well. Can you just chat a bit about FCM and how the role that plays?
For sure, Mike, and certainly great segue introduced by Don and yourself in terms of the influence, in fact, that FCM has with the federal government. But before I get into that, I think one of the things I'd share is to pick up on what Don said in those early calls. One thing that I'll carry with me the rest of my life, okay, is how immediately and unanimously across the country, when we'd have those calls, certainly with the big city mayors led by Don, and your influence on that board of mayors, the intriguing part was that unanimously from the get-go, mayors said that first we need to look after a vulnerable population. I remember that as clear as if it happened yesterday. And what a real testament to the strong leaders we have in this country, Mike, because it wasn't about what we would find ourselves in as municipal leaders. It wasn't about how do we look after our best interest in our municipalities first. It was about collectively the vulnerable population. And we continue that theme throughout. But the federal government did respond. So with that in mind, certainly we faced huge revenue losses, as we all know. I'm watching the Halifax Dartmouth ferry go right now. We didn't collect any transit revenue from early on, I think as early as April, until just quite recently. Yeah. So there were $10 billion of revenue that was earmarked early on that would be lost because of COVID. And the neat part is, with strong leadership, it's amazing what you can do because we actually had a united voice. And that's the intriguing,
really critical, isn't it?
Really critical part of what we did was unite us. We set a goal, and we stuck at it, and ended up with Safe Restart program.
I want to just ask you something, Don. We had a Premier in Nova Scotia, Steve McNeil, who I know well, announced that he was leaving a couple of months ago, and everybody assumed that I was going to run for that job. I know that Bill is always prevailed upon to run, and I know the kind of pressure that you're always on.
Don't think so.
People think you want to, if you're in municipal politics, you want to be in provincial or federal politics, but around our table, if you look at Kennedy Stewart in Vancouver, Bonnie Crombie and Ed Holder, who I served with in the House of Commons, Jim Watson and John Tory, who were provincial politicians, the old traditional farm system of politics, starting municipal, going to provincial and federal, has kind of been turned on its head. And people like yourself, I think, and we've had this conversation about the power and the importance of municipalities, but the cities is where it's at right now. I think you agree with that.
Well, I was tuned into the virtual conference of the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association yesterday, and Peter Mansbridge was the keynote, and he had a great observation. He's a real student of this country. He said, it's long been the case that federal government had all the money, provinces had all the power, and local governments, especially cities, had all the responsibility. And he was reflecting on the fact that that's been made even clearer. All of the dichotomy of that has been made clearer through COVID, because our responsibilities are even more urgent. Our lack of resources is even more significant. And this power struggle between the three orders of government to try to get things done for Canadians has never seemed more strained. And so here we are on the ground with nowhere to run and no one else to blame when things aren't going well. And it never goes well when we point out, we've got a homeless camp here that is making the same demands, frankly, the mayors have been making to provincial and federal governments around the need for housing for years. And so it's tough when when they're focusing their ire on City Hall and saying you're not doing enough, and I'm saying I've got 8 cents of the tax dollar and I don't have the jurisdiction, but I'm going to go to bat for you. And please, could you also direct some of this pressure at the orders of government having the resources and, in fact, the jurisdiction? But there's nothing like being on the ground in a nonpartisan way, able to speak to people from all perspectives and walks of life. And at City Hall, as you know, you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to work with your more progressive counselors, your more conservative counselors, people from different walks of life, people from different parts of town, and bring people together to a consensus. And it seems to be that that's getting harder to do provincially and federally. So the longer we do this, the harder it is to imagine working in those other systems, which don't seem to reward free thought and collaboration the way city halls and local governments do. And that's why, again, getting around the table with the big city mayors, with the diversity of perspectives, political and geographic and life circumstances that are around the table, there's always wisdom there. And so I don't know that I could even function in those polarized environments at this stage, having had to answer directly to the full community, not just some base or some party membership or some subset of donors. You can't do that when you're mayor and when you're in local government. And so I don't even know how a person would make that transition. But it is interesting to see, as you know, that progression of people coming out of those other leadership circumstances and coming to cities where they recognize, and John Tory's a great example of this, someone who's realized that one of the most effective places to get things done and drive provincial and federal change from the bottom up, as well as at the regional level, is from leadership at a city hall with a broad base of community and support and coalitions like these across the country that give us way more influence than constitutionally we technically possess.
That's 100% correct. In my case, I've worked with Prime Minister Harper, with Prime Minister Trudeau, with Premier Dexter, who is NDP, with Premier McNeil, and I do believe that this, by and large, municipal politics in Canada is done. It may not be completely nonpartisan, but it's certainly multi-partisan, and we get beyond the party labels, Bill. And in Halifax, I think, we've seen a council that generally works pretty well together.
Absolutely correct, Mike, and that's a great segue, again, in terms of what I truly believe. And it's been said often by different people at the big city mayors that, based on what Don said as well, that is why it's so crucial in Canada today, more than ever before, to have strong leaders like yourselves, like Mike and Don, in charge of the political end of our cities, certainly to show the leadership on the federal, national level. And what Don said about the percentage of income or taxes revenue we get, the other key component, I think, that is that there's a real recognition now at the federal level that municipalities in Canada do have in excess of 60% of the public infrastructure, number one, and really do know how to drive progress, really do know how to build communities. And that's, like you said earlier, building a nation starts with building communities. So my point, I guess, of all that is I know you're running for re-election, and that's why a retiring councillor can, in fact, look at Mike Savage and say, wow, I really support this guy. For what? For the leadership that you provide. And it comes natural. Don, the same way, that leadership, and that's what we're seeing with the big city mayors right across the board, is that kind of natural leadership that is critical to driving progress for municipalities.
I think so. I remember Don, you and I were, I think, in Washington at City Lab last year when, along with Naheed Nenshi and Charlie Clark, I think, of Saskatoon, when the word came that your world was about to change municipally, that the provincial government had decided that they were going to have a big impact on what was happening to you, and you had to get back and deal with that. But we deal with that all the time, and that's part of the job. I want to ask you, Don. I know you got a meeting you got to get to, and I don't want to prevail upon your time too much, but I had a little look when at your platform when you ran for council for the first time, which I think was 2007. And the items that you mentioned or that Wikipedia mentioned on your behalf that you were campaigning on was better transit, densification, and affordable housing. And we would have had the same issues here in Halifax. And they're still there. It doesn't mean there haven't been improvements made. But if you added a few things like reconciliation and diversity and inclusion, I expect those challenges continue in spite of the progress that's been made. But how do you feel about it in Edmonton? You guys have made some pretty important strides.
Well, we just passed second reading of our city plan, which contains a commitment to affordable housing for all and ending homelessness, contains a commitment to get to 50% of trips taken with car alternatives as the city grows from 1 million to 2, for 50% of our new growth to be accommodated through infill and densification to improve the fiscal efficiency and environmental performance and affordability and safety of the city, and to grow within our city's current boundaries for the other million, or for the other half of the new growth, the other 500,000 people. So a smart growth plan for the city, which is what I ran on 4 times now, and our city plan now codifies it, subject to regional ratification, which should hopefully come in the next little while here. So it's satisfying to see those technical and city planning dimensions of fiscal efficiency and environmental performance and affordability coming together. But along the way, you know, I've become a massive champion for ending homelessness. And so this, just in the last week, to hear the federal government echo the language we've been using at FCM for some time, that it really is high time to end chronic homelessness. You know, that is a massive move towards reconciliation and towards equity and towards inclusion and fairness. And by the way, just as the premiers asked for a huge handout from Ottawa for health budgets that are ballooning, it's actually a cost containment strategy for the massive amounts of money that are wasted in healthcare, reacting to people's poor social determinants of health associated with their houseless condition, which is remediable but for will. And now that will, thanks to shared vision at the national level and at the local level, you know, to be a part of making that kind of change has been pretty extraordinary. But again, it's not one person's vision or one person's leadership. It really is building those coalitions and building the case relentlessly over time. And I was just reflecting that, you know, I was kind of getting tired of delivering the key messages about why ending homelessness is good, not just from a human rights and dignity point of view, but from a public policy and fiscal point of view. I was getting sick of hearing myself say it, and then it's going to happen. So you just have to persevere, right?
Yep.
And so there is satisfaction in that, and you pick up the next thing. We've still got a climate crisis to deal with as a planet and as a country and as cities. We've got systemic racism to face and account for and resolve in our communities. You know, there's always the next challenge, right? And you need brave and thoughtful and inclusively minded people like yourselves leading. So I'm glad to hear you're running again, Mike, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Just let me ask you, and I know you have to run. Let me just, Bill, say this, that we talked earlier about jurisdictional issues. It's always been my view, if we can get past jurisdiction, identify the problem, and then wonder, you know, where people are going to come. But I remember when I was first elected and we started talking about housing, there was a real pushback that it wasn't our responsibility. But I think there is a will now, and working with FCM and the feds in particular, and the province, that you know, we all have to play a role in affordable housing.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And for Don's case, I'm sure you've heard this before, Don. We don't, as municipality in Nova Scotia, have housing as part of our umbrella, if you will, or part of our jurisdiction. But Mike, you're 100% right. And again, I can only pivot back and say that that's what strong leadership does, is, you know, lead the way in pointing out, quite frankly, to members of council, the importance of having good, affordable housing in a municipality. And, you know, the majority of council, the largest majority, if not all, are on board with that. And we have to figure out a way to work better with the province, as you've said. And you might want to mention that, what you think in terms of what we need at the city.
Well, we all need to work together on the housing issue, and this recent announcement is very important. Don Iveson is on his way to a meeting, and he's sticking with us to say goodbye. Don, I want to thank you very much, sir, for your time, and wish you the best.
Well, thanks, Mike. I'm just heading down to my audit committee meeting now, so I'm sorry I have to run, but go get him this fall.
Good to see you, man.
proud of you.
Thank you,
Take
my
care,
friend.
Don. Take care.